A black Navy admiral is denied a first-class seat until he reveals his rank to the pilot. Admiral Samuel Carter entered the airport, surrounded by familiar sights, the check-in counters, bustling travelers, and the soft hum of announcements over the intercom, all blending into the background. His mind was preoccupied with the high-level strategy discussions he'd just had with top military officials, thinking over matters of national security, logistics, and the morale of his sailors. For all the privileges that came with his rank, Samuel preferred to fly commercially whenever possible, keeping his feet on the ground and staying connected to the world outside of his military responsibilities. It was a trait that reflected his humility, a rare quality for someone with his status and responsibilities. Wearing a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans, with his military insignia tucked away in his jacket, there was little to suggest that he was one of the Navy's highest-ranking officers. As he approached the check-in counter, he greeted the attendant with a warm smile. Samuel gave a polite nod and handed over his first-class ticket. The young woman at the counter barely looked up as she processed his reservation. Samuel waited patiently, observing the usual flow of passengers passing by. He had been assigned to seat 2A in first class, a rare luxury he allowed himself after the grueling schedule of meetings and long nights. However, after a prolonged silence, the attendant looked up briefly, a flicker of something crossing her face, a momentary pause that didn't go unnoticed by Samuel. "I'm sorry, sir," she said flatly, handing his ticket back without meeting his eyes. "Your seat has been reassigned. Unfortunately, we no longer have availability in first class." Samuel blinked, processing her words, his expression one of calm confusion rather than anger. "Reassigned? This seat was confirmed days ago. There must be a mistake." The attendant kept her gaze focused on the computer, her tone indifferent. "No mistake, sir. We're fully booked, and your seat has been moved to economy. You can still board." Samuel briefly considered letting it go. After all, a seat was just a seat, and he wasn't one to cause a scene. But there was something about the attendant's dismissive manner, the lack of apology, and the fact that none of the other passengers seemed to be experiencing similar issues that gave him pause. It wasn't just the reassignment, it was the indifference in her tone and the way she avoided his gaze. "Is there a reason my seat was reassigned?" Samuel asked, his voice calm yet firm, a tone shaped by years of military discipline. The attendant's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and after a moment she finally looked him in the eye, her expression blank. "It's an overbooking issue, sir. There's nothing I can do." Overbooking. Samuel had flown enough times to know that while overbooking happened, it was rarely handled so abruptly, especially not in first class. Straightening his posture, he glanced at the other passengers checking in. An older couple dressed in expensive travel attire, a group of business travelers. Samuel observed the other passengers, a group of business professionals in tailored suits, all being greeted warmly and processed without any issues. Turning back to the attendant, he said, "I'd like to speak with a supervisor." The attendant hesitated, her polite demeanor cracking slightly, but then she gave a curt nod and headed to the back. Samuel sighed, folding his arms as he waited. Glancing around the terminal, he noticed a few passengers casting lingering glances his way, their expressions carrying that subtle mix of curiosity and judgment he'd grown all too familiar with over the years. He felt the weight of their stares, not as a distinguished Navy officer, but as a black man who, in their eyes, somehow didn't fit in this space. After several minutes, a middle-aged man with a carefully crafted smile approached him. His polished demeanor suggested a greater interest in maintaining appearances than actually resolving problems. "Good afternoon, sir," the supervisor greeted him. "I understand there's been a problem?" Samuel offered a restrained smile. "Yes, it seems. My first-class seat was reassigned without any explanation, despite having a confirmed reservation," Samuel said calmly. The supervisor's eyes shifted to the computer screen as the attendant quietly explained the situation. After a quick review, he turned back to Samuel. "It appears that your seat was indeed overbooked. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we've upgraded another passenger, and unfortunately, we no longer have availability in first class." Samuel felt a surge of frustration. It was becoming clear that this decision had been made well before he reached the counter, and likely for reasons unrelated to actual availability and more to do with perception. He maintained a calm, measured tone, the same one he'd learned after decades of being both underestimated and doubted. "It seems that other passengers are still being processed for first class without issue," he pointed out, his tone polite yet undeniably assertive. The supervisor glanced around nervously, likely recognizing the implication of Samuel's words. Rather than addressing the situation directly, the supervisor defaulted to a well-worn excuse. "Sir, I assure you, this is just standard procedure. Sometimes these things happen." Samuel straightened his posture, his presence commanding even in his civilian attire. He wasn't one to overlook injustice, especially when it was so clearly in play. "I'd like to speak to the pilot," he requested firmly. The supervisor's face tightened at this. "There's no need to involve the pilot, sir. We can resolve this right here." "I insist," Samuel replied, his tone unwavering. Years of leadership and authority, hard-earned through dedication and sacrifice, resonated in his voice. "I'm certain the pilot would be interested to know that a U.S. Navy admiral is having difficulty boarding this flight." The mention of his rank was deliberate, and its impact was immediate. The supervisor's carefully maintained facade cracked as he registered who he was dealing with. Samuel could see the shift in the man's demeanor, realizing he had initially taken Samuel for just another customer. The supervisor had likely assumed Samuel was just someone he could dismiss without consequence. But the title Admiral carried undeniable weight, and now the supervisor found himself in a delicate position. "Please wait here," he said hastily before disappearing, likely to consult with his higher-ups. Samuel stood, aware of the growing curiosity around him. Passengers were beginning to murmur, piecing together what was unfolding. Moments later, a flight attendant approached him, her expression apologetic. "Admiral Carter, the captain has requested to meet with you. If you'd please follow me." Samuel nodded and followed the attendant through the gate and onto the plane. As he passed rows of passengers, he noticed their curious and unsettled glances, some in mild surprise, others in confusion. The attendant led him to the cockpit, where Captain Mark Sullivan, a seasoned pilot in his mid-50s, awaited him. The captain's uniform was immaculate, his stance professional. But when he saw Samuel, a flash of recognition appeared across his face. "Admiral Carter," Captain Sullivan greeted, stepping forward and shaking Samuel's hand firmly. "It's an honor, sir. I wasn't informed we had such a distinguished guest aboard." Samuel returned the handshake with a nod. "Thank you, Captain. It seems there's been some confusion about my seat." Captain Sullivan's expression tightened as he listened to the details, his jaw setting in irritation as he grasped the seriousness of the situation. He immediately turned to the flight attendants gathered nearby. "Get the Admiral seated in first class immediately," he commanded, his voice firm and resolute. "This kind of oversight is unacceptable. We treat all our passengers with respect, especially those who have served our country at the highest levels." The attendants hurried to make arrangements, and within minutes Samuel was escorted to his rightful seat. The atmosphere was tense as he settled into the plush first-class chair. Across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive suit gave him a raised eyebrow, a mix of curiosity and newfound respect in his expression. While some passengers averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, Samuel leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a brief moment as the plane prepared for takeoff. It wasn't about the seat. He could have flown in coach without complaint. It was about respect, about the assumption that he, a black man dressed casually, didn't belong in a space he had rightfully earned. As the flight took off and they ascended into the clouds, Samuel allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had fought many battles throughout his life, not just on the seas or in high-stakes military strategy meetings, but in moments like this, moments that reminded him that despite everything he had achieved, some people still saw only his skin color. A flight attendant approached, offering him a drink and an apology. "We're very sorry for the misunderstanding, Admiral. If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask." Samuel accepted the apology with a nod. He appreciated the gesture, but he knew the issue went far deeper than just this single incident. This incident wasn't just about a flight. It was a reflection of a society still grappling with prejudice and unconscious bias. While Samuel had learned to navigate these situations with grace and patience, he couldn't help but think of the countless others who faced similar treatment without the rank or title to protect them. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Samuel gazed out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds below. His thoughts drifted to the young men and women under his command, soldiers of all races and backgrounds who fought side by side for the same cause. In the Navy, respect was earned through merit, not skin color, but beyond military walls, the lines were often blurred. Hours passed, and the hum of the plane became a familiar, calming sound. Samuel reflected on how he had always strived to lead with dignity and respect, never allowing personal slights to affect his mission. But today, the reminder of the barriers still in place, the assumptions, the biases, was stark. There was still work to be done, both within the military and in the society he had vowed to protect. As the flight began its descent, Captain Sullivan approached Samuel once more, standing respectfully by his seat. "Admiral Carter, I want to personally apologize for the way things were handled earlier," he said, his tone earnest. "It shouldn't have happened, and I'll be filing a report with the airline to ensure this kind of mistake doesn't happen again." Samuel appreciated the gesture, but knew it was only a small step in a larger battle. "Thank you, Captain," he replied. "I hope this serves as a reminder that respect and dignity are owed to all passengers, regardless of who they are." As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, Samuel gathered his belongings, preparing to disembark. The flight attendants offered him polite smiles as he stood, though traces of their earlier discomfort remained visible. Walking through the terminal toward the exit, Samuel held his head high, a quiet determination settling over him. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about standing up for what was right, even in the face of subtle prejudice. It was about reminding the world that, no matter who you are, regardless of rank or title, you deserve to be treated with respect. As Admiral Samuel Carter left the airport, he knew that his fight, for justice and dignity both in and out of uniform was far from over. Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original works created by the author to encourage reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with a commitment to respecting diversity and upholding the dignity of all individuals.